Now, Asobo delivered one of the standout games of 2022 in Requiem, itself a sequel to the great opening chapter in A Plague's Tale: Innocence. I covered the full release over on IGN across all formats and PC, so go and check that out to learn more. And also, it hit my best graphics and technology of 2022 video right here on my channel, showing how highly I rate the team, the game, and the quality. The update is a nice refresh on the game, and hopefully it will help more people dive in. But before I get into the performance and the visual changes this brings across PC and console alike, I want to discuss a subject which I've discussed quite often on this channel: 30 FPS and this current generation. Now, a great deal was said about the first batch of now generation titles that came with a 30 FPS cap. Gotham Knights was one, as was A Plague's Tale, and it caused many to jump on the bandwagon of 30 FPS games are back on console and will become the norm. And in fact, Digital Foundry even put an article and video out stating their hypothesis that it was both inevitable and expected once cross-gen is done. Plus, the impact UE5 will have on the consoles, and they use this title as the smoking gun. Now, these rushes to conclusions are common, but almost always incorrectly hasty. A swallow does not a summer make, and as I've always stated time and time again, budget and time are often the biggest limitation on development. Any hardware can run 60 FPS or higher if all aspects are in balance, and as I said at the time, these few games and Unreal Engine 5 will make no difference on that. If the team targets 60 FPS or higher on PS5 and Series X, they can hit it, even using Unreal Engine 5 with all the new features set. And given more time, teams can retrospectively add a 60 FPS mode they never launch with, which, as expected, Asobo have now done just that, bumping it over the previous 40 FPS limit the launch version had. And even the Series S gets a boost. Unsurprisingly, it does come with some sacrifices, as will always be the case, and just as we saw with Fortnite hitting 60 FPS with ray tracing and nanite running on Series X and PlayStation 5, given the time, skill and balancing, it can still be a continued option for the entirety of this generation. So how well does this patch achieve it then? And what is the cost that is now due?
I can't believe we made it.
Are the people nice here?
Nobody will attack us here, Hugo. This town is under the protection of the Count of Provence.
Visual cuts are the most obvious, and they come in two forms which appear identical from all my counts and checks on both platforms. The resolution is reduced by approximately 44% from the previous 1440p that was then reconstructed back to 4K via the team's own TAA pass within their own engine technology that powers the game overall. It's now sitting at a fixed, it appears from my counts, 1920 by 1080, again with their own TAA pass likely back to 1440p. Now, it must also be mentioned that the PC now has this resolution optimizer new update, which offers basically a temporal upsampling solution that uses their own engine techniques, which goes from ultra quality to ultra performance, and there's no option to turn it off. Now, I'm not fully convinced this isn't simply FSR 2.1 in all but name, but within the menu itself, it uses the team's own TAA upsampler, which is very good, so I would assume that is what they're using here as part of this update. The caveat here is that 1080p count may be a dynamic solution between these modes, although non-spotted, then reconstructed back to the final output, and it's likely using the ultra quality option at a 1440p based on the PC's menu, which cannot be disabled unless you use DLSS 2 or 3, which the game also supports for Nvidia players, but more on that in the PC section. Ultimately, this reduced resolution is a good fit for the increased performance and is certainly clearer and sharper than the 900p base the Series S used prior and now post this update. Now, this overall results in a softer image, textures are less sharp, hair and other dithered alpha effects and post effects are overall noisier. But the TAA can cause more blending and smudging at certain points due to the lower base pixel count it must work with. But even on a 4K screen, the reduction is not that drastic. Visible for sure and noticeable, but certainly not significant. You notice it most in the foliage blowing around and the alpha dithering that goes on for transparencies. With this mode now sitting right in the middle of the quality mode and the Series S version, which ran at a 900p base, which again is 44% less than this new performance mode. But this was not enough though for the team to hit their target, so they made further reductions. Level of detail is reduced, foliage, shadows, ambient occlusion, SSR and animation are all cut back as well, or at least they're cut back in certain places. Many of these are GPU focused, such as the loss or significant reduction of SSR, ambient occlusion, level of detail, but some are CPU related, such as reduced NPC animations, rat counts and animation overall of rats. The NPC and rat reductions the Series X and PS5 do not use in their quality mode, which the Series S uses both now, but in the performance mode, both Series X and PlayStation 5 use the reduced rat update cycle, which runs at a half rate, matching the PC menu when set to low. Now, NPC animation remains as before, but rat count does appear to be subtly reduced, but it is dynamic, so it can be hard to pick this out. If it is, it's very minor. The Series S is running at a lower rate though for NPCs, at least 1/3 of a 60Hz output, which aids CPU bandwidth and GPU, and in the rat count it's likely running both of the reduced animation cycles and rat count, which will help both CPU and GPU overall. So in terms of the sacrifices, yes, there are some clearly there. Shadow resolution is reduced, likely down to the resolution cut. There is definitely reduced foliage. SSR is now at the low setting, which means most of the time it can be hard to see, and it generally relies on cube map reflections, but you'll notice the level of detail in a lot of areas. Foliage is reduced significantly in some areas, as is level of detail, shadow cascade, and as you can see here by these comparisons, ambient occlusion. With such a dense world as this, with grass, fauna and flora, it can make a difference in some of the fuller areas. The reduction of ambient occlusion can make a difference in the visual impact the world has, as contact shadows in recessed areas of pots and pans can all be missing, and again in the long view distances of flora and trees, it really stands out, looking like foliage is reduced when actually it's just missing that ambient occlusion pass. Long vistas like you see here are ones that stand out the most, and in some of the denser towns you will see reductions in characters, NPCs walking around, and even animals such as chickens and goats reduced off into the distance, and do expect to notice it in certain areas, but overall the reductions are quite minor and they make a big difference in the performance. And the Series X and PlayStation 5 are absolutely identical on all tested sections here, aside one minor exception which we do see on occasion, and that is the gamma output curve for Xbox is significantly worse than the PlayStation 5. You can fix this, but here both set to the exact same darkness or gamma setting in the main menu, you can see the Series X is much brighter and slightly more washed out than the PS5. You can fix this by adjusting it in the main menu itself, and that will correct it, or you can see here me correcting it on the Series S in post, which means visually they can look different in some of these side by sides, but I've left them as standard so that I'm not playing with settings from the main menu, and both consoles are set with the exact same settings on both modes so that we can test the performance and visual quality overall. And it brings me back to the main point that I talk about often on this channel since I started it, the APIs and the experience and skill set of the team. Just like The Witcher 3 that launched, this is the team that's well versed in the Xbox and certainly the DirectX 12 API, and this is borne out not only in again the comparisons here to PlayStation 5, but also just how significantly faster the Series X is over the PC space, over and above what you would expect on the paper specs. But this is certainly a title that's utilising the Series X very well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I say it all the time, this is exactly what teams need to do, and it's not as if the PlayStation 5 is performing bad or looking worse, because none of those things are true. So with that covered, let's get into performance. Now, as I discussed in my review, the game was often CPU bound when millions of rats hit the screen, and even NPCs in towns, and the launch PS5 suffered the most, with it being somewhere around 35% at worse than the Xbox Series X in some scenarios. I suggested the team needed more time on the API and hardware of the PS5, as they have extensive DirectX 12 and Xbox experience. After all, they made one of the standout titles for the Series X and S in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And indeed, even after launch, they patched the game, represented here in patch 1.04, which significantly resolved many of the non-GPU data and CPU stutters, with it dropping into the low 20s at launch, but never going below 30 with this patch applied. An excellent boost indeed, and from a visual comparison, it came with none to very minor visual differences, in that if they did have any, you couldn't see it. I suspect the depth of field was possibly tweaked. As I noted in my review then, it could be very demanding and cause performance dips on console and PC, but comparing the new patch with the old one, we can see at times 12 to 15% better performance. Some of this though may be the motion blur that is on for patch 104, and I turned it off here for patch 105. But in slow moving sections, they still present some boosts over the old patch, showing the team have likely tweaked the CPU and data demands further with this patch, even without the reductions that are now added for the PC options as well. Over my 5-minute aligned test here, we only end around 3% faster with the new patch, but it is capped at 40 FPS here, so there may be bigger gaps if we could stretch above 60 FPS. Comparing the old 1.04 patch to the new 1.05 on the Series X, we can see the same GPU sections and dips still occur on the PlayStation 5, with the Series X still taking a lead here when GPU bound, but the streaming CPU impacts can be mixed between them, but still overall worse on PS5 here than Series X. Moving to the new 1.05 patch for both, we can see the gap is now far smaller, with no change to image quality, and this is likely the result of them refining the engine to utilise the PS5 a little better, as I noted. Now we see the two consoles change leads throughout the test, and the same sections that were significantly faster on the Series X, to the tune of, as I say, 35% at best worse, are now only into single digits of 8 or 10% at worst, or actually identical. But this mode is not the main feature of the update, and it is capped to 40 FPS, so headroom may very well be left on the hardware table here, which brings us nicely onto the new performance mode and what that means to the old 40 FPS ceiling.
We've got light. We're safe for now. What?
I fear the light. Find light.
They're getting out. They followed us. No, we don't have time. We have to escape now.
Arno will know what to do.
He'll never make it here with them around.
I saw something move over there.
The new performance mode really targets 60 FPS, and like the quality mode on a 60Hz screen, that is what it will top out at. But with the quality mode being limited to 30 FPS, but if you have a 120Hz screen, that ceiling can be broken, hitting a 40 FPS or 25 millisecond high in quality, and now an 8.3 millisecond or 120 FPS high in performance mode. Now, bar the cost of VSync, both Series X and PS5 would be a locked 60 FPS in this new mode. So if performance is your focus, then turn it on and enjoy the extra fluidity. But this now becomes a great benchmark to use for console and PC, and here we can see the Series X still gains the upper hand, with some 10 plus FPS higher at certain points. This translates to 15% at the highest point to the Series X, but on average we see an 8% gain to the favour of the Series X over a variety of play. Again, bringing it back to the original patch, which was 35% out, now it's much closer to reality. Some of these are the same data-related stutters that can be random on all platforms, and even between runs you can get better or worse, something I cover more on PC. But in addition though, we can see in these low-cost rendering sections the PS5 is still artificially limited, likely by CPU single-thread cost, and may actually be an API cost not seen on the Series X, which hits 120 FPS flat line here, but the PS5 still drops frames when it can't be GPU bound at this point. In reality, the GPU sections that are most demanding likely utilize the wider compute and texture rate of the Series X, which is around 15% faster, but many of the differences still present as more engine or CPU related, but without any source code or developer insight, this is just hypothetical. The new mode is certainly a huge boost over the previous sub 30 FPS the game launched with, and even without the CPU cuts to rats, I suspect the Series X and PlayStation 5 could still run above 60 FPS, reinforcing my constant point on skills and time being vital. This has allowed the team to effectively triple the game's performance over that launch version. Now these results should hopefully put to rest the naive view of 30 FPS limits are just around the corner and put all of that talk to rest. The leap at times can be significant, and some of this is aided by the far higher VSync limit reducing the cost on the engine and hardware. Again, I discussed this in my Xbox backwards compatibility boost video a few years ago. Some bugs do remain though. The game's logic and real-time cutscenes can run far faster in the unlocked performance mode, with the Series X running ahead of the PS5, which is why in this section here, it starts with the Series X behind, but by halfway it's caught up to the PS5. Also, you can get random stutters and streaming hiccups with physics setting, rats, etc. from time to time, which is also present on the PC. The Series S does gain from this update also. Again, only a single mode, which is 30 FPS on a 60Hz screen, but if you have a 120Hz one, this becomes an unlocked, likely to a half refresh rate of 60, meaning you can now fluctuate between 30 and 60 FPS, which does feel smoother at times, but do not expect a locked 60 FPS by any means. But it is great to see the team have not ignored the little white speaker console, and if you have a 120Hz screen, you too can gain some improved fluidity, albeit far below its bigger brother and PlayStation 5.
From our rivers. Caught this morning.
Is that a fair?
And finally, testing the PC, we can see the engine still has some bugs, and the Series X is at times almost 50% faster than my RTX 2070 with a healthy overclock, although the 2700X CPU is part of that impact. Setting the game as close to the new performance mode as I can, which is not 100% possible as foliage and LOD are not split, and I cannot get an exact match to console settings now, as they actually can be lower in this regard than the lowest in the PC menu. But I have set the game's output to 1080p ultra quality TAA and tested both normal and low CPU options in RATs and NPCs, but reinforcing my point on issues. In my second run here with reduced CPU mode, it actually performed significantly worse than the full CPU mode, showing that this option is possibly targeting lower CPUs and or the game can be affected by various bugs at times. Overall though, taking the best run against the PlayStation 5, my overclocked RTX 2070 is only 11% slower than the PS5, which is much lower than most tests I've carried out before with this config, and the CPU is significantly slower even on paper than the PlayStation 5 Zen 2. But I have already discussed my reasons behind this. But the Series X in some ways can be even worse. It can be 46% faster than this configuration, and some of that does appear to be GPU related, which makes some sense. The Series X is after all approximately 33% faster than my overclocked RTX 2070 here, again on paper, which does reinforce DirectX 12 being the same across both. The console does gain an extra 13% over that, which highlights the benefits of a closed box and also the team's knowledge of the hardware. The game can run up to 120 FPS in lighter sections on this rig, even with this CPU, but the CPU can also be the reason it can dip below 60 FPS at points, although it is often GPU bound also. In heavy towns, the single thread I discussed in my IGN review has been improved, with it now maxing out around 90 FPS at 100% thread utilization, whereas before it was sub 60 FPS, again limited by that single or dual thread cost, highlighting excellent levels of optimization and improvement from the team with little to no visual degradation for us the player. And it means that all players from PC to console benefit from this cracking update and hopefully extending the tail of this stunner of a game.
I fear the light. Find light.
They're getting out.
Anyway, that's it from the deep dive into game technology. Remember, I am self-funded and completely independent. So if you like what I do here and want to help, then please comment down below, like the video and share it where possible. All of that helps the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notified of new content. And also, if you can, support me on Patreon to help me out with any dollars or pounds you can afford each month. You also get access to some exclusive content and early access on there as well. You also get the option to give me feedback and ask questions in my database videos. But for now, I'm out and off to catch some rats, or at least dodge them, in some more Plague's Tale. I'll catch you on the next one.
And even the Chateau d'Ombrage, remember?
Yes. It's nice they give us a house.
That's because you're very important to them.